fascination with wild and domestic bees, and I'm here to talk about pollinators and bees. And so that would be where the story is going to go. It all began in my backyard as a kid growing up, and it began with just filled with life. And it was, for me, it was insects. I just love insects, and I've always been crazy about them. Drove my sisters crazy. My mother also drove her crazy because of how many ended up in my bedroom. So I created a menagerie in my bedroom. I was just absolute nut, a bug collector. I had terrariums, I had ant farms, I had everything. I had spiders and bees and millipedes. Everything was living in my bedroom, and I thought it was fascinating, just fascinating. But I think the main thing that I was just in love with was always bees, and I grew up under the apple tree. And my parents had a couple of apple trees in the backyard, and down in Northfield, Minnesota, where there were a lot of beekeepers, not too far away, bees will fly about 3 miles to get to a nectar source or a pollen source. And so there were farmers close by, or beekeepers close by, and I spent lazy summer, hot, muggy summer days under the tree, just listening to that awesome buzz, and you could just see the tree moving. It was fabulous. So let's talk a little bit about who are the bees. So I want to give you some of the information that maybe you've already heard this, that there are 20,000 bee species worldwide. I think that's pretty amazing, but not even 2% are honeybees. Honeybees are not the big number in the world. Most other bees are solitary, not colony bees like a honeybee is or a bumblebee is. And you can see that that's also listed. Honeybees and bumblebees are social. There are a few other bees that are semi-social. We all know that wasps and black-faced hornets are also social. We wish they weren't. It would be nice if they were solitary. But the other key thing to think about here is that honeybees are not native to North America. They were brought in by the Europeans, and there are some interesting stories that were told by our Native American prior residents of this country as they would see this strange bug proceeding ahead of the white settlers, and they knew what was coming. And so the bee was not good news to them at all. And I thought that was quite an interesting thing to learn about. But honeybees were brought over to our country by those settlers. But take a look at what we've got in the United States. Out of those 20,000 bee species, we've got 3,500 bee species in the United States. That's a lot of bee species. And look at 400 bee species in Minnesota. Did you think we had 400? That is just an amazing thing. Now, why are bees so important? And why do people get all alarmed about insect decline or maybe colony collapse, those things that are happening to bees? Well, it's because 100 crop species that provide 90% of the world's food are dependent on bees. Bees are the best pollinators when it comes to crops and to almost every single plant that depends on pollinators. There's lots of other pollinators besides bees. There's flies, of course, there's hummingbirds, and there's all kinds of things, but an awful lot of them, it's kind of a byproduct. Bees go for the pollen. They go for the nectar, and so therefore they are very direct, very intentional, and they are so excellent at it. Honeybees are not the only ones, though, and I really want to emphasize that. When I got into keeping honeybees, I was just all over that. I thought they're just the greatest. But then I started finding out about the other bees, and they are amazing. Like orchard bees are just the best when it comes to apple pollination. Mason bees, 300 mason bees can do as much pollinating as 2 hives of honeybees. Now, in a hive of honeybees, there's about 30,000 bees to 50,000 bees in each hive. So 300 mason bees, stack them against 100,000 honeybees, and they'll pollinate better. So, okay, I'll need to go home and apologize to my hive. But anyway, take a look at, there's also some specialist bees out there too. There are squash bees. They love pumpkins and squash and cucumbers. And it's just amazing. Bumblebees themselves are specialists. They have a way of pollinating that's really quite unique. They'll get into a flower and then they'll do a buzz. They do buzz pollination. And Marla Spivak at the U has talked about that. And they'll hit a perfect C and in their buds, and the pollen just falls off the plant and onto them. Whereas the honeybee really needs to wiggle around, gather it, and then go home and groom herself to get it into those pockets. So you can see some pictures up there, some different kinds of bees. You've got a green metallic sweat bee who also loves flowers. You've got another bee which looks to me like an orchard bee in the yellow flower. All right, now what's happening? Why should we be concerned? Wild bees are dying, and some are extinct already. We're already worried about the russet patched bumblebee, right? You've been hearing a lot about that one. But there are other bees that we are losing. And what's happening? It's loss of habitat. It's the loss of the flowers. And it's an agri-monocultural practice that our country is so good at. When you see fields and fields of one crop, and that crop has been pre-treated so it can handle any kind of pesticide that has killed everything along the fence row, there's nothing for the bees once that crop has stopped blooming. So there's a lot of places where you see a lot of growth. It's basically a desert to every kind of bee that there is. Same thing like in the almond groves in California. After they are done blooming, there's nothing there. They have to truck bees in. And when the blossom is done, truck the bees out, or those bees are all dead. So we've got some agricultural practices that are not friendly. We can do something about it. We can create buffer zones. We can do all kinds of ways of doing agriculture better, and people are doing that. Now that's wild bees are dying. Most people have been hearing about the honeybee loss because of this varroa mite, the varroa destructor. It's a very descriptive word for that mite that attacks honeybees. But we are also facing a perfect storm, not only because of the varroa mites, but also because of pesticides such as the neonics and the glyphosates. There's a lot of people who think that, you know, Roundup, that kills weeds, right? Well, it kills bees too. It does a good job of it, in fact. And chemical drift will just knock out hives. We've had that happen here when accidentally, it is always accidentally, but overspray in the ditches just drifted right over to one of our beekeepers, and he lost his 2 hives. And so it's a powerful, powerful thing. So neonics and glyphosates. The dangerous thing with the neonics, in fact, is that usually that's in the soil. So watch out when you're trying to buy a bee-friendly plant that it might be planted in soil that's treated with neonics. And that means that it's a systemic. It goes up through the plant and into the flower. Therefore, the flower is toxic to the bees. So something to think about. So honeybee, I'll focus a little bit more on those right now. We've all been hearing about the honeybee losses, and they are on the rise. We are not in fear of the honeybee becoming extinct like we are with rusty patch and some of the other bees, because beekeepers are able to take their hives and split them and introduce new queens. They can go into a rather big process of raising queens. So there really is a real big fear of that, except that since the mite has come to our country and brought a lot of extra diseases, you can see that years and years ago, a beekeeper would expect about 10% of their colonies to die every week. And then it started moving to 45%. And by that time, someone who's into agricultural pollination with honeybees finds themselves in a position of maybe this isn't sustainable. It costs so much to repopulate the hives. So that's one of the worries. But now we're finding summer loss too. And the summer loss is because of that bee colony collapse syndrome, which we're still trying to figure out. There's also, like I said, the chemical drift from pesticides, and then the food deserts. So what can you do about it? One is plant bee-friendly flowers everywhere. And so I don't have a handout from the Bee Lab, but you can go to the Minnesota Bee Lab website and download what they have. Or you can see my wife down there at the Master Gardener table, and she's got a lot of handouts that you can take home about what are good pollinator-friendly flowers to plant. The other thing that is very easy for all of us is to provide nesting habitat. And when it comes to bees, remember that less than 2% of the bees are social bees like honeybees or bumblebees. Most of them are solitary, and of the solitary bees, most of them nest in the ground. Bumblebees will do that too, although bumblebees will look for an old mouse hole, and they'll nest in a vacated hole in the ground. But the other thing would be leaves and twigs or bee boxes. And this is what I wanted to show you. Last year, we did a vacation Bible school on caring for creation. And every kid then took a chunk of this 2x4 that Ed Hedstrom made a lot of these cute little houses. And so the kids then drilled holes, put it on a paint stick, and afterwards, you can take a look at this, but most of these little holes are mudded up, mason bees. Within about 10 minutes of kids planting this in the church gardens, the bees were finding these. And the older kids made some bigger ones, and they chose different size holes for different species of bees. You can do this. Now, why am I telling you about this? I sometimes get fired when it's not the right size. All right, so what can you do about that? Start drilling holes. And in here, some of these holes are mudded up. There's a lot of different ways of doing a wild bee house for mason bees. But this way, you can make these very cheaply. You got some leftover 2x4 or some chips of 4x4, or better yet, just some hardwood like this birch, and put it out there, and you will find that the mason bees will just start living. They'll lay their eggs in there. They'll put some pollen in there. They'll plug it up. They'll put another egg in, more pollen, and plug it up. They'll put in. So by the time they will fill that whole 4-inch little drilled hole, and then during the summer, some will be hatching, and these ones that are in here actually were kind of late season, and I should get them home before they get too warm in here. And they think it's springtime. Now, one thing is that I'm an evangelist about this stuff, because you can go and you can buy these things, and they're really cute at the store. So I know the stores wouldn't want me to say this, but you can do it cheaper, and I think you can do it cleaner. The other interesting thing is that there's been some studies, just like when you mass 30,000 honeybees together, there's a chance of diseases spreading. If you mass wild bees together, they can start spreading diseases as well. Or if you use a bee box for too long, some diseases may have a residue. So after one season or two, these things go in the fire, and I have some s'mores. So, but that way you start fresh again, and the bees will have a new fresh home. You can buy the ones in the store that use a straw or a narrow tube of bamboo, which you can take out the old and put in the new. So they know about that as well. But I kind of like the idea of, you don't need to crowd the wild bees. One thing about the wild bees is that they don't travel very far. Honeybees will go 3 miles. A mason bee will go from this house to maybe about 50 feet, maybe a max of 50 yards. So you want your bees, wild bee houses close to your garden. And what's so fun about it is you get to watch the different species go in based on what diameter hole you drill. And there's a lot of good information. Go to Xerxes, the XerxesSociety.com. Yeah.
If they travel so little, how do they overperform the other bees?
There's a lot of them. Yeah. And they can nest almost in anything. Like a mason bee will be able to nest in just a crack in wood. They don't need me to drill holes. And that's the neat thing about it, is they don't need us at all, except they need us to stop destroying their habitat and stop putting the pesticides out. The native bees will do just fine if we let them. But that's why I think we need to do some change in order to allow that to happen. So, okay, then I say keep bee-friendly flowers clean. And I really want to emphasize that. Watch out for the glyphosates, the neonics, and all the other ones. And then encourage nurseries to do the very same thing. And we're finding that that's happening because of the market, because of people saying to Baileys or to Watkins, we don't want systemics. They're not doing it. So people have the power. So here's the thing about building a bee house. You can see down in the right-hand corner, that's a store-bought one. But there's different ways of doing bee houses. Now, the other thing about keeping the habitat for the bees is to remember that tidiness is overrated when it comes to bees. Leave twigs and leaves and some open soil. So this kind of diagram will show that there's lots of different places where bees can live. And it depends on the species. When you are taking a look at right now, if you've left your, should I say, your perennials and they had stalks, don't take them down to the ground. Leave them up because the broken stalk is a perfect place for a specific species of bee. You'll notice that thimbleberries have funny kind of galls on them. That's a wasp that lives there. And wasps are good pollinators too. And it's a wasp that's not going to sting you. So one thing is let nature provide the home. Okay, I've got a little bit of time. So here's going to be a fast course on the basics of beekeeping. And so first of all, there are all kinds of different kind of hives for bees. You've probably heard about the flow hive down in the very left-hand corner. That kind of came out of Australia. I don't believe it works up here. That basket kind of thing from ancient days, it doesn't really work so well for what we like to do with bees. I've got a hive which looks like the top right corner, a wooden structure which is called the Langstroth hive, and it's named after Reverend Langstroth. Yay, pastors. Okay. But anyway, what can you get from bees? You can get honey, honeycomb, wax, pollen, propolis, and stings. I should have put stings there because some people think stings are really good for arthritis. In fact, I have some sore knees. When I get stung, I feel better. Not that I go out seeking that, but there's a lot of products you can get from bees. A little bit about honeybee biology. I've already told you how many bees are in a hive, and most of those bees, the 30,000 to 50,000, they're workers, most of them, because there's only one queen. And then there are drones, the males. They're in smaller numbers. One thing about a worker, the 30,000 are workers, they have a schedule in their life. Their first days of life, they have to clean. They have to clean up where they hatched from, and then they get to tend the nursery where others are hatching. Then they get to move on to fanning, and that is to try to cool the hive, and also to try to reduce the water content of the honey. Then finally they get to start flying, and they orient themselves, and then they will fly until they die. So what's their lifespan? 5 to 6 weeks, 55,000 miles, they think. No one's actually followed them to do that, but let's talk about 3 miles to find flowers every single day those weeks, and they probably do it 2 or 3 times in a day. Now, overwintering bees, I've got a hive that's coming out of winter. Those bees were hatched last fall, and they are still alive. So it's interesting that the hive will change the kind of bee ability to live. It's just, to me, it's miraculous that they are able to do that. And the bees who are overwintered have the strongest sting possible. So don't mess with them. Now the queen may live 2 to 5 years, and her fertility drives the whole hive. When her fertility starts to diminish because of old age or maybe injury, the workers will then create a new queen. And that's what's really amazing about bees. All eggs that are potential females can become queen if the larva is fed the right royal jelly, and the workers know how to make it. So when the queen gets older and she needs to pass on, that's what they'll do. Now, the other thing that they will do with the drones, I should mention about drones. for all of us guys in here. It's the only male honeybee. It has no stinger, it gathers no food, makes no wax. It really has no purpose except mating. And it will be driven out of the hive before winter, where they will then perish. It's a sad, sad thing to watch because they don't want to go out. The workers, the females, drag the males out, break their wings, and cast them aside. Oh, but anyway, most people are also fascinated about the bees that they communicate. It's the waggle dance. What's so unique about honeybees, more than bumblebees, is that they will tell each other where the best flowers are. So if a honeybee comes down from my hive to my apple tree and says, whoa, this is the day, it will go back and it will do this dance on a diagonal in the total darkness of the hive. And the other bees will gather around it and watch how quickly it wiggles, what direction it wiggles, and they will know what direction to fly and how far to fly. And they'll go right to that tree. How do they do that? It's amazing. Now there's other things that they do. They'll touch each other, they'll communicate, they have pheromones, they've got smells. They've got one kind of smell that I'm very familiar with. It smells like a ripe banana. And that means I'm about to get attacked. And that means I did something to the hive I shouldn't have. Now what's a beekeeper's schedule? I'm going over time, I think. Ice out on the lake is time to remove the insulation. And then January, or ice on the lake, put it back on. You can see the other things in there. But I got it. Move. Hive inspections. This is Jessica Barr. Travis Babitsky was taking these photos of just this beautiful photos of all these bees on the honeycomb as she inspected her hive. The other thing I want to mention is a lot of people are worried about swarms. Let me get to that. This is a swarm of bees. They are gentle. If a swarm comes to your yard, don't get alarmed. Just call a beekeeper or just leave them alone. They will fly away, but they won't bother you. They are all around the queen and trying to keep her safe. There's me, after being up in a tree, I've got a branch with about 20,000 bees holding onto that branch, and the queen is in the center of them. And none of those bees bothered me or stung me at all. They were there for her. They were there looking for a new home. So I provided one. I got them into my box. And then my son and I put it away. So let me get through this one. I got into the last point that I want to make. All right. Janet and I are going to do another presentation later on, so we'll have a chance to tell you something about bees and pollinators on June 13th. But one thing, why keep bees? Why keep these things here? They teach us about life, they teach us about God, and they teach us about the earth. They also expand our perception, and they feed your spirit, they really do. You become a phenologist when you do this. And I just think it's so good. If you need more information, talk to Jeannie Wright, talk to me, or get a hold of the Bee Lab or the Fond du Lac Tribal Community College. They've got a great institute there. So I think that's the main thing I wanted to say. We can do this. Be happy. Thank you.